Night falls early in winter in Boston. Emily Carter gazed at the snow that had begun to fall outside the hospital window and took a quiet, deep breath. The cell phone in her white coat pocket vibrated, and the screen displayed a message from James. "Hang in there today. I'll make dinner." Emily couldn't help but smile. James, whom she had married 3 years ago, was the kindest person she had ever met. As a pediatrician working at the same Massachusetts General Hospital, he always looked after Emily in between his busy shifts. "Miss Carter, the patient in room 607 is calling for you." A colleague's voice brought her back to reality, and Emily hurried down the hallway. With 10 years of experience as a nurse, she had a good reputation among patients. She was especially good with children and had worked in the pediatric ward for a long time. On her way home after finishing her shift that day, Emily began to feel a bit unwell. For the past few weeks, she had been suffering from morning sickness and fatigue. At first, she thought it was just a seasonal flu, but since the symptoms persisted, she had finally taken a test yesterday. The results would be available tomorrow. When she arrived at the apartment, delicious cooking aromas were already coming from the kitchen. James, as promised, was preparing dinner. Seeing his tall, strong figure from behind always filled Emily with a sense of security. "I'm home. Welcome back, Em." James turned around and kissed her. "How was your day?" "Busy as usual." "Do you know some people earn over $10,000 a month just by posting Reddit stories on YouTube? No face, no voice, just a laptop." "I do it too. Link below if you're curious, but I'm fine." Emily forced a smile. After dinner, they sat on the sofa watching TV. Emily absently placed her hand on her abdomen. If the results were as she expected, she caught her breath. "What's wrong?" James looked at her with concern. "Just thinking." Emily paused before continuing. "By the way, my test results will be ready tomorrow." The next morning, Emily's prediction was confirmed. She was pregnant. As she emerged from the hospital's testing room, her face showed a mixture of joy and anxiety. She quickly called James, who was overjoyed, and rushed to her location immediately. Really?" James embraced her, tears glistening in his eyes. "Our baby. I can't believe it." Emily looked at her husband with tears streaming down her face. "James, we're going to be parents." However, Emily vaguely realized that not everyone in the family would share this joy. Her first call was to James's parents, Richard and Margaret. They immediately expressed their delight and said they would come to celebrate right away. In contrast, when she informed her mother, Linda, the response was cold. "Trying to get attention again?" "Sarah just got her promotion." Linda's voice contained mockery. Emily's sister, Sarah, worked at a marketing company like their mother. She didn't seem particularly happy about Emily's pregnancy either. "What has Emily done now?" Sarah's voice could be heard on the other end of the phone. Emily took a deep breath to maintain her composure. Since childhood, she had been belittled by her mother and sister. Until her father, Henry, passed away 5 years ago, he was the only one in the family who truly cherished her. "Congratulations, Em," were her mother's final words before hanging up. But Emily knew they weren't sincere. James's parents were completely different. Richard, a successful physician, and Margaret, who headed a local charity organization, had welcomed Emily like their own daughter from the day they first met her. "Emily, I'm so happy to welcome you to our family," Margaret said at that evening's dinner, holding her hand. "You'll need a lot of support from now on, so please don't hesitate to ask for anything." "Thank you so much," Emily replied with heartfelt gratitude. That night, as Emily lay in bed, she whispered to the tiny life inside her belly, "I'm waiting for you to be born. You deserve to be the most loved being in this world." James, sleeping beside her, unconsciously stretched his arm toward her. Emily felt safe in his embrace. Soon, they would be a family of 3. The loving, real family she had always wanted was finally taking shape. "Maybe once the baby is born, my mother and sister will change," Emily hoped as she closed her eyes. As the pregnancy progressed, Emily's body began to change. Despite battling occasional severe nausea and fatigue, she continued her work as a nurse. Then, when she was 7 months pregnant, something unexpected happened. "James, where are you?" Emily clutched her phone with trembling hands. Though still 2 weeks before her due date, she had awakened at 3:00 a.m. to sudden, intense pain and realized her water had broken. As a nurse, she immediately recognized these were real contractions. Are you okay? Did something happen?" James's voice sounded distant, with the faint noise of a convention hall audible on the other end. He had left 2 days earlier to attend an international pediatric medicine conference in Chicago. "The baby, it's coming now," Emily answered, grimacing in pain. "My water broke." "What?" "But we still had 2 weeks to go." James's voice immediately grew serious. "Call a taxi right away. I'll look for the earliest flight back to Boston. I'll call Margaret too." "Thank you," she managed to say before the next contraction hit. Emily barely managed to call a taxi and headed to Massachusetts General Hospital, where she worked. Upon arrival, the obstetrics team was already waiting for her. Her colleagues immediately sat her in a wheelchair and rushed her to the delivery room. "How many minutes apart are they coming, doctor?" "Carter? Doctor?" Phillips, the obstetrician, asked in a calm voice. "About 7 minutes," Emily answered, catching her breath. "But they're getting closer together." "After basic examinations, doctor," Phillips told her, "your cervix is only dilated 3 centimeters. This might be a long battle, but you'll be fine." Less than an hour after Emily lay down in the delivery room, the door opened, and Margaret rushed in, looking pale. "Emily, are you all right?" Margaret took her hand and looked at her with concern. "Margaret, thank you for coming." Emily's face showed relief. "What are you saying? You're my daughter. How could I not be by your side at a time like this?" Margaret gently wiped Emily's sweaty forehead. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. Would her own mother have responded like this? She wondered whether she should call Linda, but didn't want to hear cold words from her mother at this moment. The contractions intensified over time. 6 hours had passed, and her cervix had only dilated to 5 centimeters. "Not yet," the obstetrician said, shaking with pain. Emily continued a video call with James. He promised to head to Boston on the next flight, and continued to encourage her until then. You're strong. I'll definitely make it in time. Don't forget to breathe deeply." Margaret remained by her side, offering words of encouragement during the brief respites between contractions. Emily drifted into memories of the past. As a child, she had always lived in Sarah's shadow. When Emily came in third at a school sports day, her mother said, "Sarah would have been first." When she went to college, her choice was belittled. "So you're just becoming a nurse?" "Sarah is in business school." Only her father supported her dream. "Nursing is a profession that saves lives, Emily. Your kindness is your strength," he had said. Even at her wedding, Linda and Sarah's attitudes were cold. Sarah refused to be a bridesmaid, and Linda barely involved herself in the wedding preparations. Instead, Margaret and Richard provided full support, rejoicing as if it were their own daughter's wedding. Another wave of pain pulled Emily back from her thoughts. "Margaret," she forced out words between labored breaths. "If I don't think like that," Margaret interrupted her, "both you and the baby will be fine. We're here with you." Emily's strength was reaching its limit. Concern showed on Dr. Phillips's face as well. "Your cervix has dilated to 8 cm, but I'm a bit worried about the baby's heartbeat." "Is the baby in danger?" Emily asked, trembling with fear. "We're not at that stage yet, but if there's no progress, we might need to consider a C-section." Margaret squeezed her hand even tighter. "Whatever happens, we're here with you." Just then, the delivery room door burst open, and James rushed in, out of breath. James, relief spread across Emily's face. "You made it." "Of course." He hurried to her side and kissed her sweaty forehead. "You've done well while I was away." An hour after James's arrival, Emily's cervix finally fully dilated. "It's time, Emily." Push with all your might during the next contraction. Dr. Phillips instructed. With encouragement from James and her mother-in-law, Emily pushed with all her strength, fighting to stay conscious through the pain and exhaustion. She held on desperately. I can see the head. Just a little more, doctor. Phillips's voice seemed to come from far away. With one final push, using all her remaining strength, suddenly the room filled with the sound of a baby crying. It's a girl! A very healthy girl, doctor, Phillips announced with tears in her eyes. The baby was immediately placed on Emily's chest, a tiny, wrinkled face, a head with just a hint of hair, and small fingers slightly open. Emily was overwhelmed by a wave of love beyond this world. Hello, Ella, she whispered to the baby. I've been waiting for you to come. James gazed at his wife and daughter, unable to hold back his tears. Thank you. She's our daughter. Margaret also shed tears at the birth of her granddaughter while taking pictures with her camera. She's perfect. I must let Richard know. Emily was enveloped in the ultimate happiness, surrounded by those who loved her. But somewhere in her heart, she wished her real mother and sister could share this joy too. Holding the baby in her arms, she resolved, this time, Mom will surely be happy. James, can I call my mother? Emily asked her husband a bit anxiously. Of course, Em. James understood her determination and handed her his mobile phone. She must be happy about the birth of her grandchild. Emily took a deep breath and dialed her mother's number while gently cradling the baby in her arms. She waited for her mother to answer. This time, maybe our relationship will change, she thought as she looked at her daughter. For the first time, Ella was breathing peacefully. Hello, Linda Carter speaking. Her mother's voice came through the phone. Music and laughter could be heard in the background. Mom, it's me, Emily said with her heart pounding. The baby was born. It's a girl. I'm thinking of naming her Ella. From the other end of the phone, after a moment of silence, came Linda's cold laugh. I'm busy with Sarah's birthday party right now. What's the point of bringing more trash like you into this world? Emily gasped at these unbelievable words. She felt the blood drain from her body. Tightening her arms around the baby, she searched for words. Mom, how could you? But from the other end of the phone came even more painful words. Sarah's high-pitched voice could be heard in the background. Ruining my special day? What selfish timing. Large tears fell from Emily's eyes, trailing down her cheeks and dripping onto the baby's clothing. Her hands trembled and her voice shook. I'm sorry. It seems like I interrupted. With just those words, Emily hung up. All that remained in the room was the sound of her uncontrollable sobbing and the innocent, peaceful breathing of the sleeping baby. Emily held Ella to her chest and cried, trying to stifle her voice. Emily, what's wrong? Margaret, who had returned from the hallway, stood frozen at the entrance to the hospital room. Seeing Emily's state, she immediately rushed to her side. What happened? Margaret immediately understood the situation after reading everything in Emily's face. You called them, didn't you? Emily could only nod with a wounded heart. She held her daughter protectively, as if trying to shield the baby from her mother's words. At that moment, James returned to the room. Seeing his wife's condition, he immediately sat beside her. What happened? His voice was full of concern. My mother, Emily choked on her words. She called me trash and Ella too. Margaret's face changed in an instant. Her normally gentle expression filled with intense anger. Though she was a dignified 63-year-old woman, in this moment, her eyes held a steely strength. That is unforgivable, Margaret said in a low voice. Absolutely unforgivable. James's face had hardened as well. He placed his hand on his wife's shoulder and embraced her tightly. You'll be the best mother. Ella will grow up in the best environment. Don't worry about what they say. But Margaret had already taken action. She took out her own mobile phone and dialed Linda's number. Margaret, stop, Emily said weakly. I don't want to make things worse. But Margaret was determined. No, Emily. This isn't just a difference of opinion. This is a matter of humanity. As soon as the call connected, Margaret's voice resonated through the room. Linda Carter, this is Margaret Hamilton. Oh, Margaret. Linda's voice suddenly turned pleasant. What can I do for you? I heard what you just said to your daughter who has just given birth. Margaret's voice was cold and sharp. I have never met anyone who would call a newborn trash. What? That was just a joke. Linda hurriedly made excuses. Emily always takes our jokes too seriously. A joke? Margaret's voice grew even sterner. I cannot understand what you think is funny. Would you like your reputation to spread among Boston's charity circles about someone who speaks and acts like you do? Linda was at a loss for words. Margaret Hamilton was a person of significant influence in the local community. Furthermore, Margaret continued mercilessly, Richard, as the administrator of Henry's estate, will have to reconsider the monthly support to you both. The sound of Linda catching her breath could be heard on the other end of the phone. Henry Carter's estate was an important source of income, supporting Linda and Sarah's lifestyle. As its administrator, Richard Hamilton had the authority to determine the monthly payments. Wait, Margaret, Linda's tone suddenly changed to pleading. There's a misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, Margaret said firmly. Your words were recorded. James's smartphone voice memo has recorded everything. Of course, this was a lie, but Linda had no way of knowing that. She was clearly distressed. Please, Margaret, we're family. Real family doesn't treat each other this way, Margaret stated calmly. Emily and Ella are our family. Whether you are part of that family depends on your actions from now on. With that, Margaret hung up. A heavy silence fell over the room. James was already operating his own phone. I've posted about Emily's delivery and her mother's comments in the family group chat, he said quietly. Dad knows by now. Emily was confused. James, Margaret, you didn't have to. No, Emily, Margaret said gently but firmly. Sometimes it's necessary to draw boundaries. This isn't just to protect you, it's to protect Ella too. At that moment, James's phone rang. It was from Richard. James answered and briefly explained the situation. Richard's angry voice resonated from the phone, loud enough for Emily and Margaret to hear in the room. I will stop the support immediately. The contract includes a clause for if the recipient behaves inappropriately toward the trustee's family. This clearly falls under that category. James nodded and hung up. Dad has taken action. He says the legal procedures will be completed today. Emily lay in bed, trying to understand all that had happened. She looked at Ella. The baby was sleeping peacefully on her mother's chest, tiny hands, round cheeks, lips moving slightly. How could anyone call this innocent being trash? I'll be strong, Emily said in a small voice, for Ella. That night, Emily couldn't sleep, but it wasn't because of sadness. It was because of a new determination and a sense of mission to protect her daughter. In her arms, Ella slept peacefully. Outside the window, stars shone in the Boston night sky. Emily felt a new strength growing within her for the first time. The next morning, there was a knock at the hospital room door. Emily, it's us. Hearing that voice, Emily's body tensed immediately. On the other side of the door were Linda and Sarah. She readjusted her hold on Ella and took a deep breath to calm herself. Come in, she answered in a small voice. The door opened and Linda and Sarah appeared. Both looked more disheveled than she had ever seen them. Linda's hair was messy, and her usually perfect makeup was smudged. Sarah wore glasses and sneakers instead of her usual high heels. They each carried large bouquets of flowers and gift bags. Emily, Linda approached her daughter with tearful eyes. I'm sorry. Really, really sorry. We meant it as a joke yesterday, Sarah added. She too spoke in a small voice, quite different from her usual arrogant attitude. Just fooling around that got out of hand. Emily stared at them, unsure how to respond. Yesterday's words echoed too vividly in her head to be easily forgiven. However, her usual desire to avoid conflict and maintain family peace still lingered in her heart. I understand, she finally said. But those words were, I know they were terrible, Linda quickly interjected. She placed the bouquet on the nightstand and a small present on the edge of the bed. We truly regret it. Can we see our granddaughter? Emily hesitated, but raised Ella slightly in her arms so they could see. Her name is Ella. What a beautiful child, Linda whispered. May I hold her? Before Emily could answer, the hospital room door opened again. James and Margaret entered, their faces showing surprise and caution. Good morning. James's voice was cold. He approached his wife's bed and placed his hand protectively on her shoulder. This is an unexpected visit. Linda and Sarah's attitudes changed instantly. They quickly turned to Margaret with forced smiles. Margaret, good morning, Linda said in a sweet voice. It seems there was a misunderstanding yesterday. We never intended to hurt Emily or the baby. Yes, Sarah hastily added. We were just tired and our joke escalated. We were really looking forward to the grandbaby. Margaret's eyes were cold, her expression as hard as stone. Really? Then why didn't you visit Emily once during her pregnancy? Why didn't you even come to the baby shower? Linda was at a loss for words. That was because we were busy? Busy? Margaret repeated sarcastically. Your daughter is having her first child, and you think such an excuse is acceptable? A heavy silence fell over the room. Emily shrank back in this tense situation while protectively holding Ella. Why did you come here today? Emily finally asked. Her voice was small but steady. Linda hesitated and exchanged glances with Sarah. Because you're my daughter, and Ella is my first grandchild, James scoffed. Is that all? Of course that's all. Linda raised her voice slightly. At that moment, Emily saw James give her a small nod. He was trying to communicate something. James said gently. I think we should explain the real reason they came. Emily looked at her husband in confusion. What do you mean? Last night, because of Margaret and Richard's strong condemnation, their reputation was shattered overnight, James explained quietly. Father instructed his lawyer to immediately cut off their financial support. Furthermore, because of Margaret's connections, they are socially isolated. Linda's face turned pale. That's not Thomas. Don't say such things. It's not a lie, is it? Margaret said severely. The members of the Boston Women's Charity Association already know about your behavior, and concerns about Sarah's character have been conveyed to her workplace. Sarah gasped. Don't do anything that would affect my career. That's unfortunate, Margaret said coldly. Actions have consequences. Lying in bed, Emily tried to understand the situation. Her mother and sister had come not out of genuine remorse, but to escape a social and economic crisis. Suddenly, something changed within Emily. The anger she had suppressed for years began to burn like a quiet flame inside her. Looking at her newborn daughter, she clearly understood what kind of mother she wanted to be for Ella, one who would never hurt her daughter and would always put her first. Please leave, Emily said quietly but firmly. The room fell silent. Excuse me? Linda asked, as if she couldn't believe her ears. I want you to leave, Emily repeated a little louder. There was a new strength in her eyes. You, who called my daughter trash, have no right to build a relationship with her. Emily, Linda raised her voice. I am your mother. A mother is someone who cherishes her child, Emily calmly retorted. You never cherished me. After Dad died, you didn't even hesitate to despise me. That's not true, Linda protested desperately. I love you. Love? Emily gave a bitter smile. You came because the financial support from Richard was cut off, didn't you? Because Margaret threatened your social reputation. Linda was at a loss for words. The flash of panic that momentarily appeared on her face confirmed Emily's speculation. If money is your goal, that won't be fulfilled either, Emily continued. I am no longer the obedient daughter who does whatever you say. For Ella's sake and for my own, I've learned to set healthy boundaries. Sarah stepped forward and looked at Emily with pleading eyes. Sis, we really regret what we did. Please give us another chance. Regret? Emily said doubtfully. At the most important moment of my life, my delivery, you said, my birthday was ruined. What are you regretting? Aren't you just afraid of what you lose? Sarah fell silent. There was no room for argument against Emily's words. Please leave now, Emily said finally. I'm tired and Ella needs to rest. Linda made one last attempt at resistance. But Emily, we're family, real family cherishes each other, Emily answered, borrowing Margaret's words. James, Margaret, and Richard are my family. Whether you are part of that family can only be determined after seeing genuine change. Linda and Sarah had no words left to counter. The two left the hospital room in silence. As the door closed, Emily exhaled deeply. Her body trembled, and tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of release. James sat beside her and took Emily's hand. You're really strong. Yes, Margaret smiled warmly. I'm truly proud. Emily looked at Ella and quietly said, For this child, I can be strong. A few days after giving birth, she and Ella returned home with James and began their life as a new family. Thinking? James quietly entered the room and placed his hand on Emily's shoulder. Yes, a little, she smiled as she turned around. It had been 3 months since that day. Since the commotion after the birth, Emily had not been in contact with her mother and sister at all. Margaret and Richard visited frequently, enjoying plenty of time with their granddaughter. Emily herself was gradually getting used to parenting, and her life was finding a new rhythm. Ready to go back to the hospital? James gently asked. Emily was scheduled to return to work part-time the following week. Yes, but I'm thinking of starting something new, she answered with determination. I want to establish a support group for mothers struggling with postpartum depression and for people suffering from family relationships like I did. James was surprised by her resolve but smiled proudly. That's a wonderful idea. You can definitely do it. Meanwhile, Linda and Sarah's lives had changed significantly. The cessation of financial support from Richard immediately impacted their lifestyle. Sarah had to look for a serious job for the first time, and Linda faced isolation in the local community. They learned firsthand the extent of Margaret's influence. What do you mean I can't attend? Linda raised her voice on the phone. Her invitation to the Boston Women's Charity Association's annual party had suddenly been revoked. I'm sorry, but it's the committee's decision, she was told in a cold voice. Sarah also noticed her reputation at work plummeting, cold glances from colleagues, and her comments being ignored in meetings made her reflect on her actions for the first time. One day, Sarah sat in a psychologist's office. I just always wanted attention, she confessed in a small voice. Emily was always calm and kind. Maybe I was jealous of her. A letter arrived at Emily's house when Ella was about 5 months old. The envelope was addressed in her mother's handwriting. Emily picked up the envelope, hesitating whether to open it. James sat next to her and quietly said, It's your decision. What do you want to do? She took a deep breath and opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dear Emily, for many long years, I could not acknowledge the mistakes I made toward you. I sincerely apologize for calling your baby trash that day in the hospital. I won't make excuses. I was wrong. If possible, could I someday meet my granddaughter under whatever conditions you set? With love, Mom. Emily finished reading the letter and quietly folded it. What will you do? James gently asked. I can't decide right away, she answered quietly. If she shows real change, I might gradually consider rebuilding our relationship. But for now, she looked at Ella's crib. For now, protecting this child is my priority. Emily stood by the window, gazing out at the world. Her life had changed dramatically. She was no longer just an obedient daughter, but had become a strong mother. She had learned through experience that blood ties alone don't define family. True love and respect are what form family bonds.